I want you to picture something for a second.
Okay.
You are walking down the game aisle
Ah.
of a massive, one of those cavernous big box toy stores.
Oh, yeah, I know the ones.
Right. And the fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead, kind of casting that slightly sterile glow over the linoleum.
Yeah, that distinct retail lighting.
Exactly. And you're surrounded by this just meticulously engineered landscape of bright, cheerful colors. You see the classic red and white of the Monopoly box.
Right.
You see the candy-coated pastel dreamscape of Candyland. You've got the twister mats, the Connect Four grids, the decks of Uno cards.
All the staples, yeah.
All the staples. And right there, nestled intimately on the shelf, between those perfectly normal, mundane family games, sits something entirely different.
Oh, it really stands out.
It totally does. It's this flat, rigid board covered in crisp letters, numbers, and the words yes and no.
Yeah.
And usually, somewhere on that box, written in a suitably mysterious font, is a promise of communicating with the unknown.
It is, it's a genuinely jarring juxtaposition when you actually stop and examine it in a retail context.
Right.
I mean, we are talking about an object that carries an immense, often very dark cultural weight, yet it's shrink-wrapped, barcoded, and priced for mass consumption right next to, like, hungry hippos.
That is exactly the surreal journey we are going on today. Welcome to this deep dive.
I'm glad to be here.
Today, we are exploring the 130-year history and the absolutely massive cultural footprint of the Ouija board.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. And we've got a fascinating, heavy stack of sources to pull from today. We're talking historical patents, folklore journals, sociological studies, and psychological research.
Tracing this object's incredible journey.
Exactly. We are going to look at how it started as an innocent 19th century parlor game, how it transformed into a symbol of the occult, and how it has now evolved into this massive crowdsourced internet phenomenon.
And to guide our exploration today, we have a central thesis, lens through which we can understand all of this disparate history.
Okay, lay it on us.
That thesis is simple. The Ouija board is a mirror.
A mirror. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, because if you consider the physical object itself, it is just cardboard, plastic, paper, and ink. Maybe some wood if you happen to have an older vintage edition.
Sure.
But the object never actually changes its fundamental properties. What changes us?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Right. So our goal in this deep dive is to examine exactly what this piece of cardboard reflects about our shifting societal anxieties, our deep-seated psychologies, and the deeply intricate ways we manufacture our own folklore.
So to truly understand how a board game became a cultural lightning rod, we have to peel back the layers of spooky internet stories and Hollywood movies, right?
Absolutely.
And look at the surprisingly bureaucratic origins of the physical object itself.
Yeah.
Because the Ouija board didn't just, fall out of the sky into a witch's coven.
No, it did not.
It was manufactured.
It begins in the patent office, which is perhaps the least mystical place on Earth.
Literally the most boring place you could imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So the board, as we currently know it, dates back to a patent filed by a man named Elijah Bond in 1891.
1891? Wow.
Yeah. But to understand why Bond filed that patent, we really have to look at the world he was living in at the time.
Right.
Based on the historical research from experts like Robert Murch, who is basically the leading historian on the material history of the board.
That guy knows his stuff.
He really does. And Brandon Hodge, who researches 19th century spiritualist culture.
Yeah.
So from them, we see an America that is utterly gripped by the spiritualist movement.
Right. And just to give some context from our sources here for you listening, spiritualism really kicked off around 1848 with the Fox sisters in New York.
Yes, the Fox sisters.
They were these young girls who claimed they were communicating with spirits through a series of mysterious rapping sounds on the walls of their house.
Which kind of started a craze.
It totally did.
Yeah.
By the time we get to the late 19th century, following the mass casualties of the American Civil War and, various disease outbreaks like cholera.
Yeah, the death toll was staggering.
Right, there was this profound national grief. I mean, millions of people were desperate to contact the other side.
And they were doing it in highly inefficient ways, honestly.
What do you mean?
Well, you had people sitting in dark parlors engaging in table tipping.
Table tipping.
Yeah, where a group would place their hands on a heavy table and just wait for it to tilt or thump the floor to spell out words, letter by agonizing letter.
Oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting.
It was. Or they would do alphabet calling, Or a medium would just recite the alphabet A, B, C, D until a spirit supposedly knocked at the right letter.
So they'd have to do that for every single letter of every single word.
Yes. It was cumbersome. It was exhausting.
Which is where the classic American entrepreneurial spirit comes in, right?
Exactly. Enter the Kennard Novelty Company,
Right.
which Elijah Bond was involved with alongside a guy named Charles Kennard. They essentially looked at all this exhausting spiritualist activity and saw an open market.
They saw dollar signs.
Pretty much. They realized they could provide a streamlined, commercially packaged tool to do what people were already attempting to do.
So they didn't actually invent the concept of talking boards.
No, not at all. There were handmade versions floating around long before this, but they perfected the commercial package.
Ah.
They combined a flat board printed with the alphabet and simple answers with a planchette.
The little pointer thing.
Right, a small heart-shaped piece of wood on casters that participants would rest their fingers on. The planchette would then glide across the board to spell out messages. It was so much faster than waiting for a table to knock.
And the legend of how it got its name is heavily disputed in the sources, but it's such a great story.
It's a classic bit of marketing lore.
Yeah, so the lore says that Bond's sister-in-law, a medium named Helen Peters, asked the board what it wanted to be called.
Right.
And it supposedly spelled out Ouija, and when she asked what that meant, it spelled out good luck.
Which is a great story.
It is. But as historians point out, it was likely just that Peters was wearing a locket with the picture of a famous author named Ouida, O-U-I-D-A, and the story just got mangled over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. But the Kennard Novelty Company, they leaned into the mystique heavily.
Well, for sure.
They marketed it as a mystical oracle, but crucially also as an amusement, a novelty.
Right, like a party game.
Exactly.
Right.
It was something you brought out at parties to entertain guests. It was not viewed as a tool of demonic forces. It was lighthearted.
I read that it was sometimes used as a romantic icebreaker.
Oh, totally. A young man and a young woman would sit close together, knees touching, fingers on the planchette, giggling over who the board said they were going to marry.
That is a far cry from the modern image of someone cowering in a dark basement surrounded by candles.
A very far cry. But here's where the material history takes a turn that brings us right back to that toy aisle we talked about.
Right, the transition to a modern toy.
So in 1966, the Kennard Novelty Company had long since become the William Fuld Company. And Fuld's estate sold the patent and the rights, and the buyer was Parker Brothers.
Parker Brothers.
Yes.
The board game giant behind Monopoly.
Exactly. This is the crux of the material mystery here. Parker Brothers heavily marketed the board, particularly around 1967, and it actually outsold Monopoly that year.
Wait, really? It outsold Monopoly?
It did. So we are looking at a mass market product designed and patented to be sold as an entertaining novelty, which has shared shelf space with completely mundane family games for over 60 years.
It's wild.
It is. How does an object acquire a meaning it was never actually designed to carry?
It's like finding a potentially cursed ancient relic shrink-wrapped in the toy section at Target.
Yes.
I mean, millions of consumers collectively decided to take a piece of Parker Brothers cardboard with the utmost seriousness. We don't feel this way about Scrabble, and it literally has tiles with letters on them.
That's a great point.
We don't worry that drawing a chance card in Monopoly is going to invite a poltergeist into our living room.
Right. No one is terrified of the little metal top hat. The difference lies in what we do with the object.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the board itself didn't generate its own supernatural reputation. We generated it.
We did.
Yes. And we did that by physically acting out our beliefs over decades. To really grasp the mechanics of how a society turns a toy into a terror, we need to introduce a crucial psychological and academic framework from the field of folklore studies.
This is where we transition from the history of a board game into the mechanics of how humans process and perpetuate myths. Our sources point heavily to the work of folklore scholar Bill Ellis.
Yes, Bill Ellis is foundational here. He developed and popularized a concept within folklore studies called ostension.
Ostension.
Ostension. It's a term originally borrowed from semiotics, but in folklore, it refers to the process by which people don't just tell legends, they act them out.
So instead of just sitting around a campfire saying, hey, you hear the story about the haunted bridge? Ostension is the act of physically involving yourself in the narrative.
Exactly. When people engage in ostension, the legend generates its own evidence. And Bill Ellis formalized a specific subset of this behavior that is vital for our deep dive.
Which is
Legend tripping.
legend tripping. Okay, when I hear that, it usually evokes an image of teenagers piling into a hand-me-down sedan on a Friday night, driving out to the edge of town.
That is the classic model, yeah. Legend tripping is a ritualized visit to a haunted or forbidden place.
Like the creepy woods or an abandoned hospital.
Exactly. It is governed by very specific folk rules, and the point of the trip is partly to test yourself against the legend.
Okay.
So you go to the abandoned asylum or the bridge where the ghost supposedly appears. You flash your headlights 3 times, or you walk backward around a gravestone. You follow the rules to provoke an experience.
And as I was reading the literature from contemporary legend studies scholars like Jan Harold Brunvand and Patricia Turner, who map how these stories travel, I realized something crazy.
What's that?
A Ouija session is a textbook, localized case of legend tripping.
It absolutely is. It operates on the exact same psychological architecture.
Yeah.
The brilliance of the Ouija board, from a sociological standpoint, is that teenagers don't need to drive out to an abandoned asylum in the woods to test themselves against the unknown.
They can do it in their pajamas.
Right. The Ouija board allows them to do it right in their own living rooms or at a slumber party. The board is the haunted bridge.
It's an incredibly efficient feedback loop.
It really is.
Think about it. You hear a scary story from an older sibling or a friend at school. Your brain is primed with anticipation and anxiety. You sit down at the board expecting something to happen.
You're already on edge.
Exactly. Your heightened state interprets every tiny twitch of your friend's hand, every cold draft from the air conditioning as proof of the story.
Yep.
And then your terrified, adrenaline-fueled experience becomes the new, compelling proof for the next person you tell. You're generating the evidence for the legend in real time.
That is ostension functioning perfectly. But if a Ouija session is a psychological trip into the unknown, then like any dangerous journey, the travelers need a map.
Or, in the case of legend tripping, they require a highly specific set of rules to govern the ritual.
The rules.
The rules. Anyone who has ever been to a slumber party with one of these boards knows the rules. They feel practically ancient, burned into our collective consciousness.
We really do.
Always say goodbye, never play alone, never play in a cemetery,
Classic one.
never burn the board, or you'll hear a scream and have 36 hours to live. Always keep the planchette on the board.
The sheer ubiquity of these rules is fascinating. But here is the critical historical fact.
Let me guess, they weren't in the box.
Exactly. If you look at the patent records, if you read the original instructional insert from the Kennard Novelty Company or the William Fold Company or even the 1960s Parker Brothers editions, none of these rules are there.
The manufacturer never explicitly warned against playing in a graveyard.
Not at all. The original instructions are incredibly mundane.
What do they say?
They tell you to wipe the board with a dry cloth to keep it smooth, to rest your fingers lightly, and to be patient. That's it.
Be patient. Wow.
Yeah. The elaborate mythology of always say goodbye or never burn the board emerged entirely from repeated communal storytelling over the decades.
So we, as a culture, organically drafted a massive terms of service agreement for a piece of cardboard.
We did. We absolutely did. And this is where Bill Ellis's framework provides a profound revelation about human nature.
Okay.
These folk rules do not exist to protect the users. They exist to structure a narrative.
I want to push on that a bit because on the surface, never play in a graveyard sounds like a pretty clear safety instruction to keep kids out of trouble.
Yeah.
How does it structure a narrative?
Well, think about the function of a rule in any story. Folk rituals carry the seeds of their own violation.
The seeds of their own violation.
Right. If you have a rule that says never play alone, it instantly creates a scenario, a temptation, really, where someone eventually will play alone.
Right. Human nature.
And that transgression is what invites the danger and creates the legend. The rules aren't safety instructions, they are story permissions.
So they're basically a big red button with a sign that says, do not push.
Exactly.
It's identical to the mechanics of a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
If the characters don't explicitly establish a rule against going into the dark, creepy basement, there is no dramatic tension when the teenager eventually, inevitably, goes into the dark, creepy basement.
Because without the rule, it's just someone walking down some stairs.
Right. The rule exists purely to give the participants permission to break it, so the scary story has a catalyst to begin.
It creates a framework of consequence. If you follow the rules, you are safe, but nothing interesting happens.
And if you break the rules, You are in danger, but you get a story worth telling.
Spot on. And for decades, breaking these rules and scaring your friends was a relatively harmless adolescent rite of passage.
Just kids being kids.
Right. But the sources indicate a massive shift. In the 1980s, this localized folklore collided with a very real, very intense cultural panic.
Yes, the 1980s, the era of the Satanic Panic.
A very intense time.
During this decade, the Ouija board shifted drastically from a slightly spooky, transgressive parlor game to a symbol of dangerous, literal invitation to evil.
It's a very dark shift in perception.
And I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener, as we delve into this section. We are looking at this era purely as a cultural phenomenon, a historical event, and a sociological case study.
Right, that's important to frame.
We are not here to endorse, validate, or mock any theological viewpoints from the left or the right. We are simply examining how American society in the 1980s reacted to this mass-produced object.
That historical distance is crucial for this deep dive. From a sociological perspective, the 1980s saw an unprecedented mainstream pushback against the board.
It was everywhere.
It was. This wasn't just a few fringe groups handing out flyers on a corner. We're talking about highly mobilized parent-teacher associations, mainstream religious organizations, and daytime talk shows dedicating entire week-long segments to the hidden dangers in the toy aisle.
Geraldo, Oprah, all of them.
Exactly. And even localized pushes for legislation to ban the sale of the board to minors.
It was a pervasive atmosphere of anxiety. And the sources highlight the massive role of specific media in fueling this. You have the proliferation of chick tracts.
Oh, yes. The chick tracts.
For those who aren't familiar, these were highly popular, small comic book-style publications distributed by the millions.
They were everywhere. Gas stations, laundromats.
Right. And many of them focused on the idea that engaging with secular pop culture, whether it was rock music, fantasy role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons or the Ouija board, was not harmless fun, but a literal, mechanical invitation for demonic possession.
And if we look at the sociological data, specifically the 1993 research by Jeffrey Victor on the dynamics of the Satanic Panic, alongside Bill Ellis's 2000 book, Raising the Devil, we see a clear, recognizable pattern of how moral panics function.
How so?
Well, Victor's research shows that these panics often ignite during periods of rapid social change and economic stress.
So what were the specific social changes in the 80s that turned a piece of cardboard into a national threat?
What a moral panic reveals is almost never about the object of the panic itself. It reveals the underlying insecurities of the society experiencing it.
Okay, that makes sense.
The 1980s was a decade characterized by profound shifts in family dynamic.
Right, the economics were shifting.
Exactly. You had a massive rise in dual-income households, leading to the phenomenon of latchkey kids.
Latchkey kids, yeah.
Yeah.
Children coming home to empty houses and managing their own time until the parents got off work.
Right. There was a burgeoning youth culture that felt increasingly detached from traditional community structures and profound, pervasive worries about the unchecked influence of mass media, cable television, and VHS tapes on children.
It felt like a loss of control.
Complete loss of control.
Parents felt like they couldn't protect their kids from the culture seeping under the door. So to tie this back to our thesis, the board didn't suddenly undergo a metallurgical change and become more dangerous in 1983.
No, the cardboard stayed exactly the same.
Rather, society was so incredibly stressed about losing control of its youth that it projected all of that complex, difficult-to-solve fear onto the nearest mystical-looking object.
Precisely. The board acted as our mirror.
The mirror again?
Yes. It reflected a deep societal fear of the loss of parental authority. From a purely practical standpoint, it is much easier for a community to point to a physical board game and say, this object is the source of youth corruption. If we throw it in the trash, we solve the problem.
Than it is to address the complex macroeconomic shifts requiring both parents to work 50 hours a week, leaving kids unsupervised.
Exactly. It's an easy fix to a very difficult problem.
It's the ultimate scapegoat. The cardboard just sat there completely inert, and we poured a decade's worth of cultural panic right into its surface.
We really did.
But the 1980s feared a sort of generalized overarching evil. It was a broad anxiety.
Yes, a faceless threat.
As we move out of the 80s and into the internet era of the 2000s and 2010s, the culture's demands change. The internet thrives on specificity. It demands unique, searchable, viral entities. Which brings us to the phenomenon of named board demons.
This is where things get very modern. The architecture of the internet fundamentally altered how folklore spreads.
How so?
It shifted from regional word-of-mouth transmission, the kid at the slumber party, to global instantaneous broadcast. And this environment led to the rise of specific named entities attached exclusively to the board.
Right.
The most prominent and widely documented of these is the Zozo phenomenon.
Zozo.
Zozo.
If you've spent any time on paranormal internet forums, Reddit threads, or YouTube in the last 15 years, you have inevitably encountered this name.
It is inescapable in those circles.
It went from completely unknown to seemingly universal almost overnight.
The trajectory of the Zozo legend is a fascinating case study in digital folklore. It was primarily popularized by a man named Darren Evans.
Darren Evans, okay.
He began sharing extensive, terrifying personal accounts online on various paranormal message boards around 2009.
So relatively recently in the grand scheme of things.
Very recently. He claimed this entity, Zozo, communicated through the board, often making the planchette move in rapid figure eights, and terrorized his family.
The figure eights, yeah, I read about that.
These stories eventually culminated in a 2016 book he co-authored. But long before the book, his 2009 forum posts spread like wildfire.
As things do on the internet.
Exactly. They were picked up, copied, discussed, and eventually exploded into a massive trend on YouTube where thousands of people started filming themselves, supposedly contacting the exact same entity.
But in the research packet for this deep dive, there is a fascinating curveball.
Oh, the French text.
Yes. The sources mention a link between this very modern internet demon Zozo and a real historical book called the Dictionnaire Infernal.
Yes.
Which was published way back in 1818 by a French author named Jacques Collin de Plancy. Wait a minute.
I know what you're going to ask.
If the name Zozo is printed in an actual historical encyclopedia of demonology from 1818, doesn't that prove the legend is ancient? Doesn't that contradict the idea that this is just a 2009 internet rumor?
It seems like a massive contradiction, absolutely. But it is actually a perfect illustration of how a contemporary legend retroactively manufactures its own history.
Really?
Yes. The phenomenon you are identifying is what folklore scholars call textual ostension.
Textual ostension. Okay, I need you to break down exactly how that works in this case.
Okay, to understand textual ostension, you have to look at the source text. If you actually translate and read the Dictionnaire Infernal from 1818, the entry that mentions Zozo is incredibly minor.
Like how minor?
It's essentially a footnote. Duplanty writes about a village in Picardy, France, where a young girl claimed to be possessed by 3 demons.
Okay.
The demons were named Mimi, Zozo, and Crapulet.
Crapulet. That sounds like a heavy French stew, not a demon of the underworld.
Right. It highlights the absurdity when taken out of its hyper-local 19th century French context.
Mimi, Zozo, and Crapulet.
In the grand scheme of historical demonology, this entry is totally obscure. It almost certainly did not inspire the modern internet legend that Darren Evans popularized in 2009.
So there is no continuous 200-year history of people being terrified of Zozo?
No. There's no historical lineage connecting the French village to early 2000s internet boards.
So how did an obscure 1818 French footnote get permanently attached to a 2009 internet forum post?
The modern viral story came first.
Ah.
The internet provided the narrative. A scary demon named Zozo attacks you through the Ouija board. People began reading these stories, absorbing the expectation, and then having their own scary experiences.
Again, the ideomotor effect and ostension at work.
Exactly. But a modern internet rumor feels flimsy, It doesn't carry weight.
Right.
Seeking to validate their experiences, internet sleuths went looking for historical precedent. They dug through digitized archives, ran keyword searches for Zozo demon, and surfaced this obscure 1818 text with a matching name.
Oh, wow. And once they found it, they linked the two together forever.
Exactly. Suddenly, the modern legend calcified around this historical document. The historical proof was retrofitted to give a brand new, crowdsourced internet story a false sense of antiquity and unshakable authority.
That is wild.
Textual ostension is the act of using a text to validate a legend after the fact.
We literally reverse engineered a 200-year-old origin story for a 21st century meme.
We did.
We fundamentally needed the story to feel ancient and heavy, so we scoured the archives until we found a way to make it ancient.
It's human nature. We want our fears to have lineage.
The internet gave this folklore its modern, specific villains, but another massive, omnipresent cultural force gave the Ouija board its modern visual aesthetic.
Yes.
we have to talk about Hollywood.
Cinema is an unavoidable pillar in this history. Hollywood didn't just passively borrow from Ouija folklore, it actively codified the tropes, visualized them, and fed them straight back into folk belief.
It's a complete feedback loop.
The relationship is completely symbiotic.
And while there were films before it, the foundational text here, the undeniable heavyweight champion of Ouija board cinema, is The Exorcist in 1973.
The Exorcist is a monumental pivot point. Before 1973, the board in popular culture was largely seen as a spooky parlor trick. Perhaps a bit transgressive, but not inherently apocalyptic.
Right, it was just spooky fun.
The Exorcist didn't invent the fear of the board, but it weaponized it. Think about the early scene where young Regan is playing with the board.
Right, she's casually talking to an entity she calls Captain Howdy.
Exactly, who turns out to be the demon Pazuzu. That scene gave society a permanent, terrifying visual language for that fear. It explicitly linked the mass-market board game to catastrophic demonic possession.
And the success of that film launched 1,000 imitators. The sources trace a direct lineage here.
Oh, absolutely.
You have Witch Board in 1986, which heavily introduced the trope of progressive entrapment, the idea that the more you play, the more the board takes over your mind.
A classic trope now.
You jump forward to 2007 with Paranormal Activity,
Which was huge.
a massive cultural phenomenon. And in that movie, the board moves on its own on night vision cameras. And then, bringing it full circle back to capitalism, you have Hasbro, the current parent company of Parker Brothers, actually backing official big-budget horror films like Ouija in 2014 and Ouija, Origin of Evil in 2016.
It is the ultimate Ouroboros of capitalism and folklore. The company that sells the board also profits from the movies telling you the board will kill you.
It's genius, honestly.
It is. But beyond the commercial irony, what's fascinating is how each era's horror films reflect the specific aesthetic fears of their cultural moment. Over time, the dramatic, cinematic imagery from these movies becomes completely indistinguishable from actual folk belief in the minds of the public.
It's an aggressive rewriting of memory.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the classic Frankenstein analogy.
Oh, right.
Like if you ask 100 people on the street to describe Frankenstein's monster, 99 of them are going to describe Boris Karloff from the 1931 Universe movie.
Green skin, neck bolts.
Exactly. They will describe green skin, a flat head, and bolts in the neck. Almost no one will describe the articulate, agile, existentially tortured creature from Mary Shelley's original 1818 novel.
That's very true.
The cinematic visual vocabulary completely overwrites the original text.
That is a strong parallel, but I would argue the Ouija board phenomenon is even more insidious.
How so?
With Frankenstein, people generally understand they are referencing a movie monster. With the Ouija board, the cinematic visual vocabulary, the planchette violently flying across the room, the sudden drop in temperature, the glowing eyes, actually overwrites people's memory of their own real-world experiences.
No.
When fiction becomes folklore, people can no longer tell the difference between what they saw on a movie screen and what they believe is physically possible in their own living room. Hollywood provided the definitive visual template of invisible demons physically forcing the planchette across the board.
Right, the spooky external hand pushing the plastic.
Yes.
But this brings us to the most crucial and perhaps the most difficult part of our deep dive.
The science.
Because the actual scientifically proven reason the planchette moves might be even more deeply unsettling than a demon from a 1973 movie.
Indeed. We have to address the science of the board. The mechanics of why the planchette moves are not a mystery.
No.
The well-established, scientifically proven explanation is a phenomenon called the ideomotor effect.
The ideomotor effect. Let's break this down granularly. What exactly is happening in the human nervous system when a group of teenagers put their hands on that plastic triangle?
Okay, so the term ideomotor comes from ideo, meaning idea or mental representation, and motor, relating to muscular action.
Okay.
It refers to unconscious, involuntary muscle movements made by a person, driven by their expectations or suggestions, without their conscious awareness.
So it's not just muscle twitches.
No.
It's a direct line from your subconscious expectation to your physical movement,
Yeah.
completely bypassing the conscious decision-making part of your brain.
Exactly. When your fingers are resting lightly on the planchette and you ask a question like, is there a spirit here? Your brain is anticipating a response.
Right, you're waiting for something to happen.
If you are primed by the spooky atmosphere to expect a yes, your brain unconsciously signals your arm and hand muscles to make micro movements in the direction of the yes,
Without you even knowing it.
without you having any conscious thought of moving it. And because multiple people have their hands on the planchette, these micro-movements compound. The planchette begins to glide.
And because you are not consciously choosing to move your arm, the sensation is profoundly convincing.
You feel completely passive. You genuinely feel like an external force is pulling your hands.
And as I read through the history of this science, I was absolutely floored by the timeline here.
It's pretty amazing.
This phenomenon was identified and named by an English physician and scientist named William Carpenter, all the way back in 1852.
Yes. Carpenter was observing dowsing and pendulum swinging, which operate on the exact same principle. The chemist Michel Eugene Chevreul had also done extensive experiments on this in 1833, proving that if a person holds a pendulum and expects it to swing in a circle, their unconscious micromovements will cause it to swing in a circle, even if they swear they are holding their hand perfectly still.
1852. Think about that timeline for a second. Elijah Bond didn't patent the Ouija board until 1891.
I know.
Science had definitively, rigorously solved the mystery of how the board works almost 40 years before the board was even officially invented.
It is a stunning historical irony. The physiological and psychological mechanism was thoroughly understood long before the mass market object exploiting it even existed.
That's crazy.
And this isn't discarded 19th century science. This research has been validated repeatedly for over a century. The sources mention the extensive work of Ray Hyman.
Who is he?
He's a prominent psychologist who has heavily studied the ideomotor effect and how it relates to cold reading and self-deception. We also see it constantly demonstrated by modern mentalists like Darren Brown.
Oh, Darren Brown is amazing.
Right. He explores how suggestion and belief can entirely override a person's physical autonomy. It is a deeply understood foundational aspect of cognitive science and human pattern recognition.
Which leaves us with a massive, glaring question.
Let's hear it.
If science definitively solved this mystery in 1852, if we have over 170 years of peer-reviewed data explaining exactly how our muscles fool our brains,
Yeah.
why do we still prefer the ghost story?
It's a great question.
Why does explaining the ideomotor effect to someone who just had a terrifying Ouija experience almost never work?
This touches on a fundamental truth of human psychology.
Okay.
Explanation rarely replaces experience.
Explanation rarely replaces experience.
When someone experiences the ideomotor effect, the sensory, physical experience of the planchette moving on its own is incredibly powerful. It is visceral.
Right, because their body felt it.
Yes. Hearing a dry academic explanation about unconscious muscle micromovements simply does not possess the emotional weight to negate the intense physiological memory of the terror they felt.
It's the ultimate confirmation bias. The brain prioritizes the lived emotional experience over the abstract scientific data.
It does. But there's a deeper, much more chilling psychological insight at play here.
More chilling than demons.
I think so. When you really dig into the implications of the ideomotor effect, for many people, the scientific explanation is actually significantly more unsettling than the idea of a demon.
I want to make sure I understand that.
Yeah.
How could a subconscious muscle movement be scarier than a literal demon from hell trying to possess you?
Think about the geometry of the threat.
Okay.
A demon, or a ghost, or Zozo. Those are external antagonists. They are outside of you. They represent a force you can point to and say, that is the other, that is the invader.
Right, it's a bad guy in the room.
You can theoretically fight a demon or banish it or at least run away from it, but the ideomotor effect.
Yeah.
That means the board is surfacing hidden, unconscious thoughts, repressed fears, and secret desires from inside the user themselves. It means that when the board spells out something terrifying or hurtful to a friend in the room, it's not a spirit saying it. It's your own mind.
That's heavy.
It means you are not communicating with the dead. You are communicating with the darkest, most hidden, most uncontrollable parts of your own psyche. We are, quite literally, haunting ourselves.
That is an incredibly heavy realization.
It really is.
You can throw salt at a ghost, you can run out of a haunted basement, but you cannot run away from your own subconscious.
No, you can't.
It's that mirror thesis we started with, functioning at its absolute highest level. The board is reflecting our own internal psychological architecture right back at us and framing it as an external monster so we don't have to take responsibility for our own dark thoughts.
It is the perfect psychological deflection tool. And today, the way we use this tool has evolved yet again.
It definitely has.
This internal haunting, this legend tripping, is no longer restricted to dimly lit private basements with just 3 close friends keeping a secret.
No, it absolutely is not. The internet has taken the Ouija board, digitized the folklore, and put it on algorithmic steroids.
It's everywhere now.
We are now in the era of digital legend tripping.
What?
We are talking about TikTok sessions where teenagers play the board live on camera for millions of concurrent viewers.
Millions.
We're talking about massive Discord servers where hundreds of people conduct coordinated video call seances.
What happens to a folk tradition when it accelerates to the speed of fiber optic internet?
It just mutates, right?
Exactly. The internet now serves as a live, global, incredibly rapid folklore laboratory. The folklore is evolving in real time right in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
We are seeing new rules being crowdsourced and codified in comment sections. New named entities are popping up, but instead of taking decades to travel from town to town, they spread globally in a matter of days.
It is intensely visual and intensely performative. A generation is now legend tripping on camera, essentially performing their belief and their terror for a massive anonymous digital audience.
And that performative aspect is key. The audience in the comment section becomes part of the ostension.
Right, because they're participating.
They validate the terror, they point out shadows in the background of the video, they reinforce the legend in real time. It is a synchronized global mythos.
Looking back at the whole timeline, it's a staggering trajectory. We went from whispered, grief-stricken stories in 19th century Victorian parlors to the slick, commercialized game aisles of the 1960s to panicked, moral crusade news broadcasts on CRT televisions in the 1980s to basically crowdsourcing our ghosts in real time on TikTok in the 2020s.
It is a remarkable journey for a piece of cardboard.
It really is.
And it brings us firmly back to our central thesis. The physical board itself, the cardboard, the ink, the plastic planchette, the patents, has remained functionally identical for over a century. It hasn't changed.
Not a bit.
But what it shows us now is a highly connected, deeply performative generation. We are observing a culture that creates, consumes, and performs its myths for a massive digital audience at the speed of the internet.
The mirror reflects the times.
The board remains a mirror. It simply reflects the anxieties and the communication methods of whoever happens to be sitting in front of it.
It's just a mirror with a much, much bigger audience now. Let's take a breath and recap because this journey has been incredibly dense.
Very dense.
We started with Elijah Bond's simple 1891 patent, designed to capitalize on the grief of the spiritualist movement. We watched that novelty get acquired and shrink-wrapped for the family game aisle by Parker Brothers.
Right.
We saw how human psychology, acting through the folklore mechanics of ostension and the physiological mechanics of the ideomotor effect, breathed terrifying life into the cardboard.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We explored how the satanic panic of the 80s used the board as a scapegoat for societal anxieties. We watched the internet reverse engineer an ancient demon named Zozo. And we saw Hollywood give all of our formless fears a very specific face.
And now we're watching the whole complex psychological drama play out live on our phones.
Exactly. The true magic of the Ouija board was never supernatural. It was always deeply psychological, and it was always profoundly cultural.
And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering thought to mull over in the days to come.
Lay it on us.
We've spent a great deal of time today unpacking the ideomotor effect, how a person's deep-seated beliefs and expectations can completely override their conscious physical awareness, causing them to move an object while genuinely believing an external force is responsible.
Right.
So the next time you find yourself feeling absolutely, unshakably certain about a belief or a deeply held memory or an assumption about the world, take a moment and ask yourself if you might be experiencing the cognitive equivalent of the ideomotor effect.
Ooh.
Are you genuinely observing the objective reality around you, or is your mind, driven by hidden biases and unexamined fears, just unconsciously pushing the planchette exactly where it wants it to go?
Wow. I'm going to be unpacking that thought all week. The idea that we are constantly haunting our own perceptions is going to keep me up tonight.
It's a powerful concept.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive.
Thank you for having me.
Keep questioning the stories you tell yourself. Keep examining the myths our culture builds. And the next time you find yourself wandering down that brightly lit toy store aisle, maybe give that flat, mysterious cardboard box a little nod of respect. You now know exactly what it's reflecting. Until next time.